Think back to some of the most palpable scenes in film history. Scenes that made you experience what the characters were experiencing at such an intimate level that you could swear they were actually real and you were actually there. There's a lot of ways to go about achieving an effect like this. You can make your audience care about a character deeply, and then take them away in a manner so brutal that each strike of the blade is felt outside of the screen as much as inside of it. Or you can forbid your lovers from giving themselves over to each other, engaging the audience through the tension building between them until there's simply no other choice left. But how many films can achieve that effect with something as little as this? When I first saw Barry Jenkins's Moonlight, I was hypnotized by it. During the climactic scene in the diner and the subsequent shorter scene in Kevin's apartment, I don't remember anything else going through my mind than what was happening on the screen. On the surface, it's a normal scene, one that we've seen dozens of times before of two characters sitting around a table having a discussion. But something about Moonlight makes this scene so much more special. And it's not the music or the cinematography, although both of those are just as gorgeous, but rather, it's the story world. But before we can get into that, exactly what is a story world? Well, a story world is the place where a given story takes place. It's rarely a real location, even if it may appear so on the screen. Rather, it has its own unique set of characters, locations, and rules. This is because a good story world is always written in a way that offers the most opposition for your protagonist. Why? Because in any good story, the characters undergo a change of some sort. That means that they begin their journey in the film as one thing, and over the course of the events of the story, transform into something else. But change doesn't happen if there's no need for it, so the story world must be written in a way that demands that change. For example, Lightning McQueen in Cars believes that winning races is what makes him worth of love and appreciation, and that to win is the only thing that he needs in his life. So in order to challenge these values, where does the film place him? Into a godforsaken town named Radiator Springs, where nobody cares about his ego or achievements. It is through his interactions with the characters in Radiator Springs that McQueen finally begins to glimpse the real truth. That true happiness is found from friends and relationships, not from winning races. Cobb in Inception wants to be with his children, and in order to combat this desire, where does the film place him? As a wanted criminal on the other side of the planet where he must pull off a borderline impossible mind heist if he ever wishes to see them again. But merely opposing the character is not enough. In addition, the story world must also suggest a natural state of being for the character, a truth for the character to realize. Radiator Springs doesn't challenge McQueen's core values because it wants to annoy him. It challenges them because McQueen is wrong. The story that the audience came to watch is not of McQueen winning the Piston Cup. In the end, he doesn't, but rather of McQueen learning the truth of the world and finding his happiness. The exact same is true for Inception. Although some of the mind heist sequences are endlessly fun to watch on their own, what makes them so intense is the underlying story about a man trying to get back to his children, and the risk of potentially failing. The story world thus has two functions. A good story world must suggest a natural state of being for the character, the place where they are at their happiest, and it must also set up opposition for their journey there. If you do only the former, you have no story, as you have no conflict. And if you do only the latter, well then you have Moonlight. Unlike in Cars or Inception, the story world of Moonlight opposes Chiron, the protagonist, because of who he is, not because it wants to push him towards a greater understanding of himself or some epic adventure. Chiron is a gay man living in a world of toxic masculinity, where strength and ruthlessness are valued and sensitivity is ridiculed. His mere existence is met with disapproval and at times violence. Instead of encouraging for him to develop further, the story world of Moonlight is weaponized against Chiron. Rather than drawing out his true self, it targets that self as a weakness. Chiron begins the film as little. All we know about him is that he's a sensitive and a quiet kid, often bullied by the others. When Juan takes Little to the beach, he tells him that at some point in his life, he needs to stop looking to other people and decide for himself what he's going to be.
At some point, you gotta decide for yourself who you're gonna be.
For Juan, this means becoming his own man, a drug dealer, a position that he is ashamed of, but that ultimately grants him a level of authority and power within the story world. For Little, however, the issue is not quite as simple. Although Juan breaks the law, he is still aligned with the values of the story world and thus accepted. But even in explaining what being gay means to Little, he knows that the same opportunity might not be presented for him. Although Juan and Theresa might accept Little, they know that the story world won't. Chiron's teenage years only see these values enforced. Unlike McQueen, whose values are proven wrong in nearly every scene, or Cobb, who is constantly pushed closer towards his children, Chiron is instead attacked for every display of his sensitive true self that he makes, from abuse by his mother to bullying from his classmates. Chiron's natural state of being is not accepted. Rather, in order to survive, he is forced to lean back on the values of the story world, Although it fights against every fiber of his being, he's forced to stand up to his bullies and be hard on his mother. There's a point in most films which John Truby calls the self-revelation. It is the point where the hero strips away the facade that he has lived behind and sees himself honestly for the first time. For McQueen, this is sacrificing his dream of winning the Piston Cup in order to help the king. For Cobb, it is finally letting go of his dead wife in order to be with his children who are still alive. This stripping away of the facade is not passive or easy. Rather, it is the most active, the most difficult, and the most courageous act that the hero performs in the entire story. Chiron has a moment like this when he sits at the beach with Kevin. In this moment, he confesses to his deepest feelings. He lets go and reveals his true self fully and without filter.
I cry so much sometimes, I feel like I'm gonna just turn to drugs.
Now, in most films, this would be the point where Chiron is embraced by the story world. He would share this tender moment with Kevin and would slowly fade to black. But because the story world of Moonlight is weaponized against Chiron, this moment doesn't return him to his natural state of being. Instead, his vulnerability with Kevin is used to punish him. In the following scene, the hard values of the story world are once again enforced when Kevin decides to beat up Chiron to avoid revealing his own sensitive side to his classmates. It is this ultimate betrayal that causes Chiron to finally fully side with the values of the story world, fully betraying his sensitive nature and instead choosing violence. Just like McQueen and Cobb, Chiron has been effectively pushed into becoming one with the values of the story world. Only in doing so, Chiron hasn't gained his happiness, but rather he has completely lost himself. When we next meet Chiron, now calling himself Black, he's borderline unrecognizable. He's made himself hard and intimidating. He has also chosen himself the same profession as Juan, that of a drug dealer. It is a job that, like for Juan, grants him a measure of respect and status within the story world. Any sign of the old Chiron has pretty much been wiped off the face of the earth. It's a person that Black never looks back to. In this scene with his mother, he becomes agitated at the mere suggestion that he might be someone else than what his appearance suggests. With Chiron living according to the rules of the story world, and with no apparent natural state for him to exist in, these scenes effectively mark the end of the film. Only Chiron is still not in harmony with himself. He can play the role of a playboy drug dealer as the story world demands him to, but it's still not who he is. This is painfully apparent in the moment where he picks up the phone and, in front of our very eyes, is immediately transported back into the sensitive boy and teenager that we know him to be. Finding a way to exist in harmony with the story world, a place where the character is allowed to be themselves, is the ultimate goal of any story. For Chiron, the mere mention of this need is enough to make the world around him pause. Only with Moonlight, because the story world lives in opposition with Chiron, we don't know if finding that harmony is possible. We've been repeatedly told that it won't be. We've already seen Chiron commit the most courageous act of revealing himself to disastrous consequences. But still, the desire to fill this void persists. Just like Cobb's journey to be reunited with his children, or McQueen's need to understand his fatal flaw, Chiron's search for his natural state of being is what the film is about. This is what makes the diner scene feel so palpable. Instead of a bookmark ending where the character is finally awarded with the thing they've been pursuing and return to their natural state of being, the diner scene in Moonlight is written more like an interrogation. Present in the moment is not just a question of will Chiron be able to find his harmony, but the cost of even attempting to do so. The moment that Cobb sees his children, he's immediately free to let go of everything else. And the moment McQueen decides to side with the values of Radiator Springs, he's embraced by everyone, even the world of racing that he originally started in. But Chiron is paying a price. In order to find his happiness, he can't just let go, he has to push. The most courageous thing that Cobb and McQueen each did was to let go of their past ways. But it's not really that courageous, is it? Because the second they did, both of these characters were immediately awarded with the thing that they wanted from the beginning. But for Chiron, every word that he utters, every piece of himself that he reveals, is an act of extraordinary bravery. With every second that he spends in the diner, he's undermining the peace that he has made with the story world. He's admitting to himself that despite finding a way to exist within the story world, there's still something that he finds more valuable. This mediation is present in every word, every look, and every pause of the scene. Every second could mean the difference between gaining everything and losing everything. Because in the world of Moonlight, honesty and vulnerability are not rewarded. They're punished. And happiness is not granted as a reward for suffering. It has to be fought for. That is the power of the weaponized story world. The more it opposes your character, the more conflict you'll have in your story, and the bigger the payoff will be at the end. You can use this logic to build epic action scenes or moments of heartfelt romance. But if you write your story world to oppose your character almost entirely, the way Barry Jenkins and Terrell Alvin McCraney do in Moonlight, You might get away with just this.